wasn't at the last GOP meeting, all I said, so I didn't get to see her, so.
She's wealth of information.
She's really sharp.
And she knows the history.
Yeah. All right, I would like to call the Bedford County School Board Budget Work Session into order for today, March 21st, 2024. Ms. Johnson, if you will, please call the roll.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Daniels?
Here.
Mr. Holbrook?
Here.
Dr. Hubach?
Here.
Mr. Knight?
Here.
Mr. Nelms?
Here.
Mrs. Purvis? Here. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? All right, I have a motion by Mr. Nelms. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Holbrook. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The agenda is approved as presented. All right, our next topic is around the discussion of the fiscal year 24-25 budget. Before I turn it over to Mr. Hagler to take us through some documents and some information, I want to first say thank you to the board and to our community for providing much needed feedback through emails, through phone calls, and through our town halls that we had at the 3 different zones. We received great feedback that the town halls were most important to our community, and so we will be doing more of those on a go-forward basis. But for overall presentation, I thought it was very good information that we were able to receive from the community during those times, because it was one-on-one. We were able to sit down, have conversations, and respond. So I do want to say thank you to the community for participating in that. So as we get started, there's a couple things that I've asked Mr. Hagler to take us through. During the communication, a lot of our community was not really familiar with the reversion. And what does that mean to us? Why is that important to us? Why do we need to be in front of it? So that is one of the documents that I have asked Mr. Hagler to take us through and to make sure we as a board fully understand it, and then also information that can be shared with the community. In addition to the reversion information, he is also going to take us through the current capital improvement plan of what's on our list, what's unfunded, and again, how does it impact the budget and why that should concern us as board members and also as a community. And then the next step, Mr. Hagler will take us through the technical adjustments for the actual 24-25 budget. Once that information is presented, we as a board will have that discussion of what do we want to do with the budget as it is presented. That is where we will have conversation. If we want to weigh any of the options that were presented to us for efficiency and academic success, and then also any other topics that we as a board have questions on regarding are there things that we can remove, things that are not going to be added based on feedback from teachers, community, etc. So I've asked Mr. Hagler to take us through those 3 documents, and then after that we will go through and have discussion. At the end of the night, we will have consensus on if this is the budget that we want to move forward with for Mr. Hagler to finalize, and we will come back on Monday and make a final vote, unless one of the board members feels differently and wants to take that vote tonight. But I think we need to go through the exercises, have the discussion, and finalize that. We will still need to come back on Monday night because we have other information that we need to discuss. But with that being said, Mr. Hagler.
Okay. Thank you. The first document we're looking at, and I believe these documents are posted on Board Docs, so if the community, anybody watching, they can access these documents online.
Mr. Hagler, I'm going to stop you. Can you guys hear him okay?
A little muffled.
And then while we're doing that, I know last meeting there was some feedback that certain board members could be heard, certain ones could be heard out there. We could hear things up here. So I want to make sure if we could do a test to make sure that, you know, the room here can hear what we're saying. You guys good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I just remind everybody, make sure you're talking into your microphone so what we're saying is being heard. So, okay. Sorry about that.
We're
Mr.
looking at my
Allen.
document and towards the mic. Barry, am I good here? Okay. So the first document we're going to look at is really a calculation for reversion. Reversion dates back to when the city of Bedford reverted back to a town status. There was a negotiated document between the city and the county for the reversion that they negotiated, but part of the agreement is really the state budget. It's not written into code, but each budget that they do at the state level had some incentive to have smaller cities revert for efficiency. That incentive lasts about it's supposed to last 15 years. So we've been tracking this for 15 years. The calculation changes for that incentive payment that the state gives to the locality. It comes to the school district. That changes, and how much that is and how much that spread is based upon the local composite index, which they recalculate every biennium to say how much can the locality pay for education, how many students you have, and the overall state budget for K-12 education. So there's multiple factors that are changing that number each and every year, and I'm tracking that as we go forward each year. If you look at the very top, the LCI history, you can see that at the time of reversion, Bedford City had a 0.31 funding formula in that for K-12 education within the city, and Bedford County had a 0.41. That's a big spread, and at the time of reversion, that was about $6.1 million. Roll forward, the county's local composite index has been going up. So that has increased the spread, increases the amount of that difference. So that 0.3132 is locked in each year for our budget that we receive for the county, and it's been set at that. So our actual is the 0.4427, but we're getting funded based upon 0.3132. That number is the local ability to pay. The state, so if you look at that, if it's 0.31, 70% is coming from the state, 30% from the locality. The higher the LCI, the less the state gives you. So I'll stop there. That's just, it's more complex than the overall state budget, but that's one of the biggest funding metrics that, on how we get funded. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions on how the LCI works.
Questions?
So at the end of reversion, in the 28-29 year, whatever our county LCI is, it'll go back to that. It will no longer be at the 0.31. It'll go back to 0.4427 or whatever it is they calculate in the future. Based upon current calculations, the amount that will generate, or the amount that the state will stop sending us at that time, is probably close to $8 million. So that $8 million is in our operating fund right now. In 28-29, we will get $8 million less from the state, or some other number close to that. I'll recalculate that. That will no longer come. And just so that whatever board is sitting at the time to make up $8 million at one time is catastrophic. So we've got a plan to have most of that set aside for that time period. And that's the second part of this page, so I'll go ahead and go into that. The plan to prevent that kind of cliff in the 28-29 year is that the county has been putting $500,000 aside of new money into our maintenance reserve fund. So that's cash going in for CIP projects. The school board started putting $600,000 aside each year. And so the county's going up $500 each year, we're going up $600 each year, and that's cash that can be spent on capital improvement projects. And that chart below is showing you how that's going to accumulate up to, the year before reversion, up to about $7.7 million. That's very close to the $8 million calculation of what's going to go away from the state at this point. During that time, and all that money being set aside, is close to about $33 million. That is cash money that we can spend on capital improvement. When I get to the second part, the second page, I'll talk about the capital improvement and how that money's earmarked and what we're planning to use that money for. So each year, we're going to continue to go up. We're setting aside $600,000 of new money, or either we're cutting, we're committed to that, and the county's putting $500,000 of new money into that capital reserve. And so that's how we're going to build up to that $7.7 million. That needed $8 million that I'm calculating right now changes every year. State budget changes, enrollment changes, LCI could change, so I do a recalculation. So once we have a final budget from the state this year and I know my final numbers, I'll recalculate that and keep the board updated on that. And you can see over the last, since it started, it's gone from 6 million up to 8 million. So little changes in that LCI have big impacts to what that is. Once we get to the end, if you look at that money going into the maintenance reserve fund for cash maintenance projects, if all that money shifts over to the operating fund, you will have $0 going into maintenance reserve for maintaining equipment. So that's looking 5 or 6 years out. I mean, that's part of my job, is guiding the board and saying, here's the budget for this year, fine and dandy, we're all good. But I'm looking ahead 5 years and going, can we sustain all of our schools, 2021 facilities, with zero maintenance dollars? I don't think we can. So right now we've got a plan for reversion, but we don't have a plan for beyond on maintaining our equipment and stuff like that. There either has to be an influx of new money from somewhere, more state money, setting aside more money, asking the Board of Supervisors for more money, or long-term you're going to have to cut programming and reduce the operating budget so we can maintain our equipment. So that's the thing we're struggling with right now, and that's why I'm just trying to keep the board abreast of what's coming 5 years from now. Whether you're on the board or not, it's kind of looking forward and being prudent and making sure that we don't have this cliff, and then for 4 or 5 years we do no maintenance again, and then people go, well, why aren't you taking care of things? Well, there's no cash there. That's what happened during the recession when we postponed and put things off for a while. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Yes, sir.
So the difference between the LCI and what it is now means, yes, we're putting money aside, 32, I'm trying to get to 32.7, but that's it. You're saying there's going to be a shortfall of $7.7 million a year, every year. That's what you're saying. As of right now, as it sits.
For the maintenance reserve?
Just in general, you're saying that
Yep.
we're getting less money every year from the state. And that's right now, it looks like it's to the tune of $7.7 million.
My calculation right now is that when we get to the 28-29 year, and they switch back, not from the artificial 3.31 LCI, but up to where we are actually right now, the state will send us about $8 million less.
Every year.
Every year going forward.
So every year going
It
forward. So if our
resets
budget
for-
this year
It
is
resets for our true LCI after that.
So if our budget is $120 million, it's 112, right?
Correct, but what's going to, if you're looking at our overall budget, yes, it'll go down, but we'll probably take care of our operating fund so we don't have a catastrophic, because it's mostly employees in the operating fund. A lot of that 7 or 8 million will shift over to the operating fund,
Then you have,
but then you've got to deal with the long-term maintenance.
and that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So let's just say it's $8 million shortfall. We have 32 put aside. That gives us 4 years to be able to maintain.
But we don't have 32 set aside.
I know, but that's
Okay.
the goal, is that we're trying to get there.
The
right?
32 is the accumulated amount of setting aside money that we are spending for HVAC.
We don't even
roofs.
have like a 4-year.
Yeah.
It's
We're
gone.
going to spend that, and when I get to the CIP document, you'll see where that money's earmarked right now. The board can change that. That's just the CIP plan, but it's mostly earmarked for HVAC, roofs, boilers, parking lots, painting, and things like that. It's the maintaining of things.
So you have to make a choice, essentially, at some point, between maintaining buildings, or essentially, if you have to cut people, the amount of kids in the classroom are going to go up. The amount of services to be able to provide to kids is going to go down. Other services, such as extracurriculars and other things, we're going to have, or the board that's sitting here is going to have really tough decisions to make. And I think that one of the things that we saw when we got together with the community is we were trying to explain every everything that's happening here is not just happening in a bubble. It affects the entire county. And I think by doing those town halls, what we got a lot of people to understand, like, hey, this is something I have not thought of, and you guys make some good points. The problem is we only had 15 or 20 conversations each, and we got to have 100 times the conversations in there, and so that we can get more people getting buy-in and giving us solutions, and at least understanding what we're all up against here. So I just wanted to I understood that. I just wanted to make sure that those numbers were really clear, and this time bomb that we have to deal with is not going away, and there's going to be some really hard decisions that we have to make if nothing changes with being short $8 million a year.
I look at it as very similar to taking care of our bus fleet or anything like that. You have to invest and have money set aside to take care of it, and not be, well, hopefully we'll come in under budget and put the money there. You have to be more prudent than that. The recession really hurt. I mean, there was probably 3 or 4 years that nothing was done. I mean, everybody's budget was gutted. So we've been rebuilding that. And I think we've got a good plan to take care of the operating by reversion time. We got to look beyond that, and it's either new money that's coming in cannot be used in the operating fund. It has to be set aside for that in the future. That might be less raises, less programs, less things we can do. If there's not new revenue coming in from any source, then it will probably have to be cutting the operating fund and the services that we're delivering right now. So it's going to be a combination or something that we're going to have to do long term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So basically just for all of us who, like me, are not the finance person, so basically what you're saying, in 2028, the $8 million that we've been using in whatever funding we're doing will disappear. The money that we have set aside to try to help with that is only 7,700 or 7.7 million instead of the full 8 million or so.
Yeah.
And so that really only covers us for most of the first year of the 2028.
That'll be a permanent shift of money that we're setting aside from our budget right now of new money, 600,000, and the county 5 is going to continue. So as you look at the chart for next year in the 24-25 budget, there will be 4.4 million going into the maintenance reserve. That's cash we can spend on projects. The next year it'll be 5.5 million going in. The next year 6.6, and then the 7.7. The theory behind this is that after that year, that 7.7 moves over to the operating fund to make up for what the state's not going to send us. So you're not having to cut $7 million out of your operating fund.
Okay.
And just, for those that were on the board during the recession, I think there were almost 3 years in a row we were cutting $4 million almost every year, and we eliminated almost 200 positions. So that's ugly. So this is to prepare not to have a catastrophic cliff, ugly, bad, operating. But we do need to take some measures, and it might be that the plan is, okay, let's get the reversion, but keep putting 600,000 aside and rebuild it up in the next 5, 6, 7 years after that. Or let's put a little bit more aside in the current year. Or there's a mixture of ways, but it has to be dealt with. And I don't know what the ideal number for the maintenance fund would be. I'll work with the facilities committee, but when you have 21 facilities, roof, HVACs that have a 20 to 25 year life, you're talking about probably 4 or 5 million that needs to be in there each and every year. So that would be my recommendation, is where we ultimately have to be built up to that. I don't think it has to be in the very first year you have to have that, but you look at it that you've got to get it up there eventually, so future boards and future administration can take care of the equipment in the best way possible for our schools.
All right. The recession was what, 2008, 2009?
Yep.
Okay. You said we had to cut about 200 positions?
About 100, it was 187.
187 positions. How many students do we have in Bedford County Public Schools now?
We are projecting
Pre-K, 9,100.
9,100 with pre-K.
9,100. In the time from 2008, 2009 to now, how many of those 187 positions have been brought back?
The balance
Overall positions, maybe.
I think quite a few of those, because as the state recovered, they were giving us more money, and as we got into the recovery, so you stopped buying school buses, you laid off a lot of staff. Class sizes went up, so where we're at 21 to 1 in elementary right now, it was like 24 to 1. So as you lowered back that's how you got more staff back. You adjusted the staffing standards. So we tried to get to the pre-recession numbers, and I think we've made a good effort on that and getting back. You can't really compare actual staff members right now because the enrollment has changed.
That was
But we-
that was
but
going to
we
be my
have-
next question.
Yeah, we have restored our staffing standards to what they were probably pre-recession.
We've added those positions back. We have 9,000 kids now. In 2008, 2009, how many students did we have in Bedford County Public Schools?
I can look that up. Give me a second here. If I have it on the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet goes back to 2016-17. So 2016-17, we had 9,300. Probably back at that time, we were probably close to the 10,000 mark.
Okay. So let's say it's 1,000 kids. So it's 10% less kids, but we've added most of those positions back.
We do, when we have a decrease, and when I get into the budget document on the back, if our enrollment goes down, we have staffing standards. So when enrollment goes down, we do eliminate positions. So we don't leave so we're looking at our staffing, and so if staffing goes down, there is an elimination of positions. So I can say this, if our enrollment was the exact same, we would have added them all back, because we did lower our staffing standards back down to they were pre-recession.
And if we have that $8 million shortfall and we find a way to put some, and we put $5 million away for maintenance, we still are short. And so we got to come up with, what do we do and where does that go? Is something not getting fixed, or is classroom sizes changing? So I'm just trying to make it really clear
Yep.
to everyone listening that these are not easy decisions, and one way or another, someone's going to get upset, and rightfully so. But we're going to all work together to try to do the best thing we can for the long-term viability and sustainability of Bedford County Public Schools. But I think it's important, everything you're going through and the questions that we're asking are really important for transparency for the public. So I appreciate you answering these questions.
I'll pause because it's a complicated thing, and it's been going on for quite a few years, and people hear the term, but to really grasp what's happening. And our plan not to have a cliff is very wise. And so we are planning for the future, but there's other things you have to also recover and plan for too. So I'll pause and see if there's any other questions.
Any other questions or comments regarding reversion? Okay, I think
Okay.
we're good to move forward.
The second page, there's 2 pages with the second. This is the approved capital improvement plan. It's a much more lengthy document with pictures of every facility and also write-ups. But this is a spreadsheet capturing kind of like best estimates at the time that was put together, probably 4 years ago. So the top part on the first page there, these are tentative approved projects which we believe the county can fund. The top 3 are pending a PPA approval, so we're in negotiations on that. So we're working through those top 3. Those are the canopies and auditoriums at Liberty High and Stanton River High, and also the gym at Bedford Primary. The next 2 are hopeful projects that they may be able to fund, and these 5 were approved by the previous board as the 5 top priorities. When I say 5 top priorities in regards to new building or renovations, very larger projects that usually require a borrow. So those were the top 5 that we communicated to the Board of Supervisors, and so we're working through those. The top 3 are being worked on right now with that PPA proposal. The ones listed below were identified as needs in a study, and no ranking has been done on those. I believe they're alphabetical right there. No funding has been identified for those. Those are kind of looking out in the future. You may need to renovate, you may need to build a new school, you may need to do this in the future. It's kind of giving a board, a next 10 to 20 year lookout of things you may have to do. So those are not immediate concerns, but you're going to have to deal with them eventually, and that's what the study did that we hired out. So that has $118 million. There's no funding source identified for that. Future years of borrowing by the county are possible as debt load goes down, or whatever debt load that they're willing to accept. And that would be an ask from our board to them to borrow probably for these projects because they're larger. So those are we separated them out like renovations, new buildings are larger projects that require borrowing and are not maintenance type projects like HVAC and roofs. So we've separated out. Any questions on that page? A lot of those estimates are based upon square footage and a state average. No detailed study has been, the scope of those have not been identified, listing everything. It's just what's the square footage of the school and how much would the state estimate you would do. That scope can vary and those prices can vary greatly, but it's just a ballpark figure. Any questions on that page?
Questions or comments on CIP?
I got one.
Yes, sir.
What was included in the athletic improvements? Fund?
I'd have to dig that out. Each of the 3 high schools submitted requests, and they were different at each school, depending on the condition of maybe their field house or their stadium. But it did include, I think all of them had like stadium improvements on that for sure. I think those are outdated and a lot of the work needs to be done. We take care of the anything that is unsafe because those are inspected, but expansion and things like that, field houses and stuff. Each school had different requests in there. We can bring that back to the board that was submitted, and I'll look through that document and get that to you. Okay.
Next page.
Next page. This is the page that we got to take care of our HVAC, our roofs. Other projects we got to paint once in a while. We have to take care of parking lots, boilers, flooring. And so staff put together this and kind of timed it out so we're not spending, $20 million in 1 year. We're kind of like parceling it out over years so our staff can handle the bids and oversee the projects. So this is just a listing of when we estimate that these projects would come up for bid. We would come to the board and ask them to go out, and then we get the bid documents ready and go out for bid on those. If you look at the bottom line for the next 5 years, which ends at 27, 28, that's last year reversion, we've identified about $35 million of projects. Well, the money we're putting aside is close to that, which is at $32, $33 million for the next 4 years. So that cash that we're putting aside is for these projects right here, that we're saying they're coming up, we need to do it. And one of those is what I think drove a lot of the conversation around Stewartsville is there's an HVAC due at Stewartsville. It's coming up. That's for next year. It's on the CIP. So that's why the board was discussing that project in particular. You can see in the out years, you have a Stanton River High School HVAC, Liberty High School HVAC, and Jefferson Forest HVAC. Those are big projects. Those are $5 million projects. So we need the cash reserves to take care of those. And so we're building up that money so we can go out for bid and get those taken care of in those years. So this is just a plan. We don't take any action on this until the board tells us to go out for bid on that. So it always comes before the board. Even though it's on the plan, things can get shifted. I will say this, if there's cost overruns on any of these, and something comes in higher, then things have to shift later. Things are going to shift off this plan to future years. Or if something shows up that is critical, it could shift up earlier in this plan. It's a year-by-year thing that the facility committee and staff work together and look at, and those things could be shifted around and brought back to the full board for voting when we go out for bid. But it's an idea of when we're targeting to do these major maintenance things. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Questions or comments on the 5-year plan? Mr. Knight?
I was just going to say that similar to the CIP, these numbers are just estimates. They're based on, previous experience, history, understanding the industry, but not necessarily, in any case, are these true estimates that are...
I would agree with that. These estimates are probably 3, 4, 5 years old. I will say what was happening during COVID, there was a great run up on some prices. We were shocked by some of the bids that came in. We're hoping for better bids in the future now that that is beyond us, supply chain issues. There has been inflation. So these prices were kind of estimates that are 3 or 4 years old. As we go out for bid and get true bids coming in, we'll revise these in the future closer to what we're experiencing.
And we don't always know exactly what the scope is.
Correct.
So you can't really have a true number with a
You're looking at it,
scope.
yeah. When you get into an HVAC project, it's like, when they go in there and we hire the firms that are going to, put the architectural and engineering drawings, they may find some things that we didn't think needed to be replaced, but they do, or things that need to be added. Clean air quality, the controls might be shot. So there's things that could add to it or make it cheaper, depending on what the condition of the overall equipment is in.
There could be a more efficient way to do it, and,
Yes, sir.
and it could cost less. So,
Yep.
Okay.
No.
I just wanted to say, in personal experience, you look at a location for a restaurant and you send it out to an architect, and the architect is going to look at it and they're going to make it the way that they want to do it for an architect. But a contractor may come in and go, we don't need to replace all this ductwork. We can reconfigure the ductwork, and that could save a lot of money. So I think it's important that, when we're looking through those things, that we figure out what that scope of work is going to be. And just because it's easier for an architect to do doesn't mean that a contractor can't find another way to do it that could also save us a good deal of money. So we've seen that in the private sector, so I'm sure we can see that here too.
And I'll add to that and just say the facility committee, we have two gentlemen on that know the industry and are quite helpful with putting their eyes on bids and different things and ways we can do things to have a good product and take care of our buildings, but making sure we're not wasting money there. So I really appreciate their help and their eyes on this and working with my staff and making sure we do the best we can for the schools. And saying, why are we doing this? Should we do this, or should we use a different product? So that committee reviews those bid documents in detail, even though if we had an engineer and architect draw them up, that committee with my staff are reviewing that, and I'm proud of what that committee is doing right now.
Questions?
Okay. We get to the operating budget. So the Finance Committee, I'll make sure I get my committees correct, has met 3 or 4 times, and the way I work a budget up, just for the new board members, is you start with last year's budget, and then you start looking at changes, technical adjustments, mainly on the expenditure side. Once you set your budget, then you get into the year, and as you know, I do quarterly forecast. Is that budget good? Is the numbers coming in like we expected? Are they lower or higher? So I go back and make adjustments to the budget before we start building the next year's budget. A lot of those are reductions. We have turnover savings in staff, so there's some salary reductions there. So that's savings. There's other line items that we're not using anymore. Those are reductions. But there's also increases sometimes, and we have to do some forecasting on that. So I'll go down this document. I won't go down line by line, but I'm happy to explain any line to any board member. The Finance Committee has gone line by line on this and asked a lot of questions, and we spent 3 meetings going over each one of these line items, which I believe is the purpose of the committee. The very top part says federal revenues, but you can see expenses there too. The way I budget the federal revenues is that if I have more federal revenue, then I have more federal expenses. I do it dollar for dollar. There's a couple corrections on here where it doesn't look like that. There's some things I had to fix up in the budget, but typically if the federal revenue goes up, the federal expenses go up. Federal revenue goes down, federal expenses go down. So it's really a net zero change to the budget in most years. There's a couple federal grants that I had to do some corrections on, but overall very little impact to the budget on that. The big change there, you can see the ESSER 3 money there at the bottom, $900,000, will be used up by the end of this year. So the COVID ESSER money is gone. So we've come in with a soft landing. I think other divisions we're spending a lot of that money this year, and they're going to have a cliff next year. And you hear some of that in the news. I think this board was very wise, and hopefully we brought this in where it's not going to be a cliff next year without all that ESSER or COVID money. If you look under the county, the $100,000 is us putting money aside to our textbook fund. So we're saying, okay, got to cut a little bit out of our operating and put it into our textbook fund so we have enough money for adoption. Just like the maintenance reserve, when we have to adopt textbooks, we need to be prudent in making sure we're putting money aside. We do get state money, but our target is to increase the set aside for what we're putting in it to about $500,000 a year. This next year will be up to about $300,000. We're doing $200,000 this year. Next year will be 2 more years, and then we'll have it at $500,000, and that should sustain us for future adoption of textbooks. It's just being prudent and make sure you have that money set aside. The $600,000 is the amount we talked about earlier. For the reversion plan, we're going to move $600,000 out of operating over to the maintenance reserve. So we're planning for that cliff. Under the state, there was a large amount of money we received last year. It was called All in Virginia. Unlike other grants that we've received in the past, you spend money and you get reimbursed. The state is going to send me all that money this year, $3.3 million. So we did our amended budget to recognize all that. We're not going to spend all that. So what will happen next year, I removed all of that from the budget for next year. The revenue went away and the expenditures went away. I will be bringing to the board pretty quickly next year a supplemental appropriation to recognize any unspent money from the state. But that cash is going to carry over, and we're going to spend it next year. We'll do the supplemental. I've explained this to my counterpart at the county, because typically you don't carry over operating fund to spend in the operating fund next year. This will be an exception, because it has to be spent in a specific way in the operating fund. So this is going to be a carryover that has to be spent that way. So I removed it. We'll add it back next year to the exact amount that we're going to spend. So when you look at the overall number and change in the budget, you're going, I'm eliminating $3 million. And then we're going to have some state money coming in. And you're going, overall, the budget's not changing much. But we've got some big movers. ESSER money going away, state money going away, but other money coming back in. That's primarily the revenue side. I will speak to the state budget last. I wanted to get down through the technical adjustments first. And then I'll tell you what we talked with the Finance Committee and also executive staff of how we can really pass a preliminary budget, but I'll get to that last. Any questions on the revenue side there at the top?
Questions on revenue? Questions or comments?
Okay. On the expenditures, I'll hit some big ones, but if you have any questions, I'll answer any of those. The biggest mover in the expenditure side is, if you look at the first two items there, that's compensation. That adds up to about $3.4 million. The amended budget that we passed in December, took effect in January, had a 2% increase for employees. I only had to budget 1% because we were halfway through the year. I have to capture the other half for next year. So all employees got a 2% raise as of January, but I only needed to adjust the budget for half of that because it only took place in January. So I have to factor that other 0.5% in. That's the second half of the January 24 2%. The salary step in COLA will add up to 3%. So the steps for employees are different depending on where you are on the range, what salary you're on, and what step you're on. So it's not precise, but all employees would receive in total COLA plus step 3%. That's based upon what the General Assembly just agreed on a compromise budget. The House and the Senate both had 3% increase next year, and that's what the General Assembly voted on. However, I'll talk about the state budget at the end. The governor did not have that in his budget. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's what we've built into the expenditure side for that. That's the biggest change that I want to make a note of. If you go down a little bit further, health insurance. Last year, we did not go up on our health insurance. We kept it where it was. But inflation's catching up to us without a doubt. And so we're recommending going up 7% on the health insurance premium. That premium is shared between board and employees. So there's 80%, board picks up 80% of the increase of the premium, employees pick up 20% of that. The committee asked, how's that going to impact our lowest paid employees and stuff? The 3% would more than make up for that, so there's not going to be less take home for any of our employees. But that's a pretty big increase at 7%, but we had 0 last year, and so we have to make adjustments on that based upon our cash outflows. And so we are self-funded, so we have to have that money reserved in order to pay our claims. So that's that page. Those were the big movers. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about any of the other line items. I highlighted those, but there are other line items on that page, and then we'll flip to the last page.
Yeah,
on
so
the
Randy, I
adjustments.
don't want to skim over this. So the 3% increase, if I want to make sure everyone understands, when we get handed a 3% increase, that is not fully funded from the state, correct?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, so can you explain that and make sure that we understand and that the community understands that a 3% increase does not mean that 3% is coming directly from the state to us? And make sure you include in the SOQ, non-SOQ positions.
So I'll explain. There's two components to that. And I don't have a calc tool tell me exactly how much I'm going to get for this. I had to estimate that. So when the state says they're going to recommend a 3% increase, compensation increase for teachers and SOQ positions, that's only what the state identifies is SOQ positions, which is the minimum. We have more teachers than the standards of quality. And so any teacher beyond that, we pay 100% for. Any position that they don't recognize and we have more of, then we pay 100% of that increase. On the SOQ, they only give you their portion of the local composite index calculation I was talking about earlier. So you don't even get 100% from the state. When they say a 3%, their portion, you pay the rest. Any position above that, you pay 100% of. Let me give you an example. I think it's the most stark example. The state recognizes, I think, for instructional aides, this is not special ed, but instructional aides, I think they recognize 8 positions for our district. I mean, we probably have 30, 40. So you could say, get rid of all those and we don't need, but they're greatly needed and they do a lot of great work in our school. So everything above that is 100% on us. For the 8, they don't give us 100% of that raise, they only give us a portion of that. So I hope that explained it. If I were to have to estimate this is rough, I don't have the calculation tool from the state yet. So if you say the 3% is 2.5 million, the state's probably going to give me between 1.2 and 1.5 for that. So locally, you're picking up $1 million, $1.2 million to pay for that. Did that help?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so any comments or questions on the expenditures?
To say that on the step and COLA 3%, I mean, every school division is looking at this. And other school divisions have already announced what they're doing when they're passing their budget. So there's a lot of things that we want to do, and there's a lot of things that we essentially have to do. And sometimes it's the right thing to do, but, you know, we're sitting up here and saying, well, do we need to do that? Well, if every other school division around the county is doing it, and our teachers are all watching this, and they go, well, they're not going to give us a raise, where do we think they're going to go? So when you're trying to fight for talent and try to, tell them Bedford County is the best place to come, the first place people go is where they're treated the best when it comes to money. The second thing they want is their voice to be heard. So we need to make sure that we're doing that. So say what you will, and I think that we fought hard to restore steps a couple years ago, and we want to do this, but understand that there is definitely a cost to us locally to do that. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear. Again, could be the right thing to do. We want the best and most talented people to come to Bedford County. We have to be able to play on the same playing field. So that's important, but we don't have discretion when it comes to a lot of what comes out of Richmond. The all-in money and these things, they're saying this is what if you want this is what you have to do. So I just want to make sure the public's pretty clear on that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the one other thing that I want to make sure from a finance committee, not all steps have been restored.
Correct.
And so, I don't want to make light of that, and I don't want people who have not been impacted by step restoral to think we're not aware of that. And we'll comment on that later when we get to the actual, final budget of what Randy's going to present. But I think it's important to make sure, yes, teacher steps have been restored, but there are categories that have not been restored. And that's an important piece that we need to make sure we're talking about, as we continue this discussion around budget. So, all right.
I'll go ahead and add to that just for the new board members. When the recession hit, there's a step that people would make a step from, you go from third-year teacher to fourth-year teacher. Those were frozen for 7 years. The recession hit, but it took a long time for the state to recover and start giving K-12 money, and so everybody was reeling, and it took a long time to restore. We've done a salary study, we've been able to restore all of our teachers to their years of service, so that was commendable, but that took a lot of money to get those steps back. We've restored all of our nutrition workers to their appropriate step, our bus drivers, our aides, and our custodians. So what we did is we made sure we took our teachers first, then we went to the lowest paid on our employees and started working. We're working our way up. What's left to be restored are clerical workers, our maintenance and garage staff, our technicians and IT technicians, our health providers, nurses, psychologists, and then administration. So all those are still owed 6 steps. We restored 1, but they're still stacked. So they were all frozen, and those have not been restored. So I think some information was sent out to board members on that. I'll also make mention down here, and Mr. Daniels, thank you. there has been inflation, and our employees, even though if their pay stays the same, they're having to pay more and stuff. So that's, taking care of your employees along the line. What you're saying is recognizing what's happened. It's costing more to live now, and taking care of that. I will say the last line on that first page, and there's more expenditures on the next page, minimum wage, General Assembly passed that. Governor still has to sign off on a lot of this stuff. So there's still some things going on in Richmond, but it goes to $13.50 next year, and they'll go up to $15.26. So when we get to 26, that line item will be a little bit larger for some of our scales.
And Randy, I know you touched on this. Again, want to be very transparent. Health benefits are going up by 7% overall for the count, for us.
Yes, sir.
80% will be paid by the school board, 20% will
sir.
be referred to the employee.
Yeah, and I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the impact to an
I
employee.
think we averaged it at $7.
For an employee only on our high deductible plan, that's $7 a month. Yeah.
Thank you.
So then if you flip to the next page, there's quite a few other things on this page that are technical adjustments. And I view technical adjustments as you have to do them. Electrical goes up, I'm applying to staffing standards. So if you look at all those negatives right there at the beginning, that's because our enrollment's going down. We project our enrollment. I take Mr. Blankenship's numbers, we plug it into a model on how we staff our schools, and those are the reductions. If you change the staffing standard up or down, those numbers change. It's an allocation methodology. So you can see there's quite a bit of savings we're building in for that. If you look at the line right underneath that, there's a +7 there. There's difficulty in staffing our small schools. You have unique situation where class sizes can be quite large. And so when you apply the staffing model, you could have 4 classes that have 29 or 30 kids in them. That gets awkward. So I've asked the committee to build in, because I've never had this before, so that the HR staff and the instructional staff on an as-need basis has some positions in the budget they can use if needed. Doesn't mean we're going to use all those. We have those in reserves. We can use those in schools where we see some class configurations that are just really difficult. A third grade class of 29, it's like, ugh, that's tough to handle. So we've been using ESSER money to do that. That ESSER money is going away, so we've asked for that to be local money to adjust to any of these small schools or any grade configuration problems that we might have in schools. And so I wanted to note that. That has not been, that is an add to the budget. It's unique, so I wanted to point that one out for the full board.
So that is one of the topics that come up during the town halls, was regarding larger classroom sizes. So I heard you mention earlier we're set at 1 to 21.
Yes, I
For-
believe 1 to 21 for K3.
For elementary.
K3, yep.
K3. So
That's an average. So there might be some less, some
So
more.
it's an average, but here's my question. If you just mentioned a third grade class with 29 people in it, why would that be if we've set the standard of 1 to 21?
Because you're taking a calculation like for the whole school and doing some metrics and stuff on the students as a whole, but you could, say you have a third grade class with 29, but you got a second grade class with 13. Well, we're putting them all together and doing the calculation of how many teachers to provide. So that might skew things. So the second grade has 13, third grade has 20. So it's the calculation.
If there's more than a certain, there is a para in the classroom, is that?
We've been assigning pairs and stuff. It's up to the principal and stuff, but I believe the board last year said, is it 27? Once we get to 27 is probably when we would use this to apply.
I want to make sure I understood.
Average is 21, but once it got to 27, we'd say, let's go ahead and put a teacher in there. That's what these 7 would be used for.
And do we know how many of those classrooms we have where it's above the average of 21?
Oh, there's quite a few above because it's an average of 21. We got some above at 22 or 23 and some at 18. Do you have that?
There's 199 elementary classrooms if you do K3. You're not doing preschool. There's 218 if you do preschool. So out of those 199 classrooms, I calculated how many were 22 and above, and there were 37. 25 and above, there were only 8. out of 199.
Mr. Knight?
So for the class that has 29, for example, is there a reason why you wouldn't split that in two and have two 15-person classes? Is it because of not enough teachers, or is that not a good model? What's the reason why?
I guess what comes into play is when you have a really small school, like 100 and some kids, and you have an allocation to that school of 9 teachers. And you have things where kindergarten's 28, first grade's 31, another one is 29, and another one is 30. So you can't split everything and take it down to everybody having 13 and 14 and 15 and 16. So you kind of have to decide who splits and who doesn't, or if you split them all, the way they fall sometimes, everything ends up to be in a class of 13. So 14, 13, you see what I'm saying?
Right. And I understand that, different groups, like maybe this senior year, will be larger than the next, or vice versa, right? Because it isn't always perfect, right? Where
No.
you have the same numbers. So I understand it wouldn't be, neat. But I just wondered why, when you get to as close as, 30, why you wouldn't be splitting
Well, we
the two.
would,
Yeah.
we would. But what happens normally in small schools, like what happened last year, is they're allocated 9, but to not have a 30 in a classroom, you have to use 11 or 12 teachers. And that happens frequently in small schools.
Understood.
It's the smaller schools to a little bit bigger and smaller schools. It's about 4 or 5 schools where we see the difficulty here. And if you just did that for every one, then you would look at a smaller school and you're going, every class is at 12 or 13. And at the larger elementary schools, everybody has classes of 21 and 23. And you're going, so it just becomes a little bit more difficult.
And to Mr. Hill's question, I'm not sure if I heard the answer, but with a classroom that has that many students in it, there is or there is not an assistant or a paraprofessional?
Well, the previous board, that's why we're asking for these 7 positions to be at our discretion. We won't use them if they're not necessary, we won't use them. But if you get to a classroom in elementary that has 27 or above, we would look at that classroom and see if we could go ahead and we would assign a teacher to that school for that, and then it would be split in half. But we would look at zone transfers and a lot of other things before we pulled that trigger. But we need some things, we need that in the budget. So I'm not just, instruction to HR, Randy, we need more positions. And I'm like, I didn't put it in the budget, but this is untenable for this class and we just do it. I'd rather have reserves in the budget to deal with that. So we're trying to address that issue.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
The rest, those were my highlights. There are other adjustments as we go down through there. Be happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to point out that one in particular because I would say that is really an add to the budget, not a technical, but saying we need to maneuver with that. And as I said, we have been using the COVID ESSER money to deal with those those class size configurations in the last 3 years. So bottom line is, if you look at the very bottom of your sheet, in the far right column, technical adjustments to the budget, we need $120 million in expenditures, $116 million in revenue projected there, shortfall of about $3.5 million. I have not plugged any new money in for the state at this point. I wanted to show you what it looked like without the state's budget yet. So now we get into the kind of unknown. We're playing with like best guesswork. House and Senate came out with versions vastly different than the governor's. The General Assembly's approved budget is vastly different than the governor's. There's still debate in Richmond on what's going to happen. The governor has veto rights. We've been listening to conference. We get feedback on this. So we don't know at this point. If we get that, the Senate's version was like the richest. The House was not as rich, and the governor's was least favorable for K-12. I'm not talking about politics here and overall for Virginia, but for K-12. So I had to do some self-calculating, taking what I knew to kind of do a best guess. If we were to get the House version, it would be about $4.5 million more to K-12. So that would make up that 3.5 and $1 million plus. we'd be in good shape. If we got the governors with a 3%, so he had a bonus in the first year, I recalculated with the 3%. So if we got the governors with the 3%, it would be about 2.8 million. So my recommendation to the board at this time, this is really going to be a preliminary budget. The main thing to do is to pass on to the Board of Supervisors what is our request from them. And so they can advertise their budget. We're only requesting them to put that $500,000 in the maintenance reserve. We're asking for no money in this budget for the operating fund. I think they already know that that $500,000 is their plan to get us to reversion. So I think it's pretty easy for you to request that from the Board of Supervisors. They do have to advertise the budget. My recommendation to the committee and to the board at this point is if we plug in that $3.5 million difference, House was 4.5, Governor's were about 2.5, 2.8. Hopefully we come up with 3.5 in the end and we got a balanced budget. What if it's not that number? It's not going to be exactly that. If it's significantly less than that, we've got to come back and make cuts. If we get more than that, then we can come back and say, what does the board want to spend that additional money on? As Mr. Hill was saying earlier, there were some unfunded things from last year. There was some frozen steps that had not have been done. But I'll also defer to Mr. Daniels as saying, we still have to put money aside for CIP in the future, where it goes down to zero. So those are competing, and that's what the board's, if there's more money, that'll be a good thing. We can come back and decide that later. There were also some programmatic changes that were requested in sports. I would say at this preliminary stage, none of the restoration, don't plan any more money going to the CIP, don't add anything else to this budget until we have a final. But move forward with this, anticipating the $3.5 million from the state. That's our preliminary budget. The ask to the county, they can advertise. We'll have to come back and revise it once we have a budget from the state. We hope to have it soon, but in the last few years, those budgets have gone into May and June, and it's taken a long time for the state to agree on a budget. I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but at least we'll have a preliminary. We'll start working on contracts, getting everything ready. If they can't come to an agreement and the 3% gets stripped, we'll have to come back and kind of decide what to do. So we'll have to wait and see what they're doing, but this is a preliminary budget. This is our plan. We're taking care of technical adjustments only. Any ads or programming to be decided later. And if it's less money from the state, we'll have to make some cuts. So that's that was my recommendation to the committee. It's my recommendation to the full board that with these things, you could pass a budget and move forward with this. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on that, but that's my recommendation.
I want to make a few comments. So I think it's important to remember some of the things that are not funded from last year, new request from this year, which kind of flowed over from last year. But all of these items, and I want to read them out so we understand what's not being funded, that has been asked for or recommended. And Randy, keep me honest, but my calculations are somewhere around $1 million to fund those things that are either not funded from last year or new request from this year.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So again, restore frozen steps, clerical, $130K, maintenance and bus garage, $45K, health, be $115K, technology, $57K, admin, $162K. There's a maintenance coordinator position, $69K, mowing services, $100K, 3 new athletic trainers for each zone, which would be required at $210,000 in order to add middle school cross country at $19K, middle school outdoor track at $27K, and middle school cheer at $6K. And I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers out to you, but again, all of this adds up to $1 million. But I think it's important for us to remember these are the things that we are not funding. So they're not being added yet again this year. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just want to make sure we're all aware. As far as the other new requests, athletic funding for increased costs for officials, $45K, middle school assistant coaches, $30K, science probeware and microscopes at $20K. So keep that in mind as we talk about that. So that's $1 million that we're not funding if we were to keep the budget whole as Mr. Hagler has presented. Now, the other topic is we had 4 options presented to us around efficiencies of things that we could consider as we're looking at our budget. So as you remember, there was an option 1, option 2, 3, and 4. If you look at option 1, I think it was about $800K. If you looked at option 4, option 1 and 4 gave you about 1.2 million in savings. Mr. Hagler, again, keep me honest.
That's correct.
Okay.
800,000 for the one, 400 for
Right.
the other.
So throwing those numbers out there, wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. I will open it up for discussion from the board. So, yes, sir, go for it.
Before I give a statement, I just wanted to ask one question or clarify one thing. You said you listed off these things that are equal to about $1 million that we cannot add to the budget unless we get more money from the state than what we think we're going to get, right? Because you're looking at it on the lower end or maybe in the middle.
It's in the middle.
In the middle.
Yep.
So there is the slight possibility that we get more and then we could come back, and those would be the first things we would look at adding in, or it could be.
We could be. It
Yeah.
could be. But yes,
Okay.
that's a valid point of if we get more, we certainly have a list to choose from.
Yeah.
But there's 7 of us that
Right.
may have different opinions of what should or should not be on this list.
But we at least have a starting list,
Absolutely.
and we can add
Yep.
to. And take
Great
away.
call out. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yep.
And then I'll go ahead and with that, I've thought a lot about these options since February 22nd. I think it was when we heard them, and the same night that the public heard them. And there's been a lot of calls and a lot of emails and the town halls and sports events and just running into people in the at the gas station or wherever. And there's been a lot of conversation. So I've thought a lot about it. I've talked with with my wife a lot about it, and I've put a lot of thought into this, and so I thought the best thing for me to do was to write a statement and read it, and that way hopefully I get everything that I want to say out. And I'm in particular speaking about Stewartsville Elementary as it is in my district, but it's important to all of us. So forgive me if I struggle to read my own handwriting here. Let me begin by saying that while I may disagree with some of the members of Bedford County concerning the future of Stewartsville Elementary School, I do believe wholeheartedly that each and every member of this board is attempting to make difficult decisions based on what they believe is best for our Bedford County schools, with providing our children with the best education opportunities possible as the top priority. Additionally, because the members of this board share the desire to lead in this way, we will most often find ourselves in agreement on the issues that arise. In particular, those issues where the solutions are the difference between right and wrong, safe and unsafe, or great and terrible. In the case of this decision, the future of Stewartsville, there may very well be some benefit to each of the 4 options presented, as well as other options discussed informally. A person could, in good conscience and without malice, choose to support one of these options because he or she sees the benefits as superior to the disadvantages. However, and despite all this, I cannot at this time support any option that includes the closure of Stewartsville Elementary School. My reasons for standing against all 4 options and any other option that includes closing Stewartsville includes the following. First, while my traditional conservative nature calls me to be fiscally conservative, it also calls me to be conservative with my decision making. That is, I am led to be methodical and patient in my decision-making process, to gather as much information as possible, and err on the side of slow and steady change as opposed to sudden change, which can sometimes cause chaos even if the intention was good. As a traditionalist, I value tradition. That is, I value the collective thought and wisdom of those who came before me. Stewartsville may be an old building in need of a lot of repair, but the culture, the spirit, and the traditions of Stewartsville are those that we must conserve, and better yet, emulate. A great culture like the one we find at this school was not built in a day, but one decision could destroy it in a moment. By closing Stewartsville, we may solve 1 or 2 problems, but we may cause several more problems, and we will certainly lose something worth conserving. We need more time and more information before we should consider such a great change. Before we consider closing a school or consider asking for more money, we should, as each person, family, and all levels of government should do, look at every penny we are spending to be sure that our budgets are proper and the money isn't already there but being misappropriated. This is being fiscally conservative. Also, before we close a school, we must know exactly, as close as possible, how much money is needed to maintain the school for several years. We cannot close a school for budget reasons if we only have a rough guess of how much money is needed for that school. Additionally, in order to decide to close a school, we must have a detailed closure plan that is not built on hypotheticals and is reasonably executable. We cannot decide to close a school and allow ourselves a matter of months to implement a plan that is not predetermined with exceptional detail. Finally, and maybe most importantly, I cannot support closing Stewartsville Elementary School because the people of this community, in particular the people of my district, have spoken. In an overwhelming show of passion and love for Stewartsville, as well as a desire to maintain Bedford County Schools zoning and configuration as is, the people have made their statement and I have heard them. Once again, I value tradition. And while America has recently and unfortunately moved away from some of our traditions, we were once established on the principle of a representative government. That is, our elected officials represent the will of the people they serve. Sometimes it can be difficult for leaders to discern this will. But in the case of this decision, at least for me, the people's desire is obvious. To close, I must mention an idea for the path forward. Stewartsville Elementary School does need work, and it will cost money. But I believe the amount needed will be a fraction of the estimates. It is my belief that we should do the following. We should keep Stewartsville open, focus on selecting the next superintendent, which is our next task, so that he or she, the school board, the board of supervisors, the central office, school teachers and staff, and the parents can all work together to get Stewartsville into a great physical condition, one that matches the great spirit that already exists. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to echo that a little bit. First, I want to thank the administration staff for presenting us with those options. We do face a lot of financial challenges at this moment, but we definitely need to stay on task and focus on reducing cost, but remain good stewards of our community. As a father who has a kid in the school system, I had to look at this at many different angles. The truth is we do have capacity issues, but we also have many hurdles to overcome. With that being said, I kind of got to echo Johnny here, and I do not support any of the options presented. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and say that I do not support closing Stewartsville at this time. Only other statement I wanted to make is I just want to thank you all for your support. I did miss a few of the meetings due to a new addition to the Nilms family, so we just wanted to say thank y'all for that as well.
First of all, I want to say that the town hall meetings were a win-win. We had open communication with the community. We built trust. I believe many people came in thinking they were, going to be just worthless in their conversations with us, but we had give and take, and we listened, and we answered questions. And overall, the community was very encouraged by that. The reality of our financial situation was made public instead of just, nobody paying attention to that. So that was also very helpful. The committee came together and the community came together for the sake of the children and to work out a solution together. The Board of Supervisors invited more coordination and with the school district, which is always best. And there were constructive conversations that we had. It wasn't just people attacking us. They were people who came with some possible solutions or some concerns without just feeling like we were the enemy, which I think that is something to say for the school board. I am very privileged to be a part of the school board. I've been very impressed with the leadership that Marcus has already shown. His desire to be transparent with everyone and to make sure that we're on task and addressing things quickly and efficiently. The diversity of skills on this board, I have been so impressed with the facilities people who have gone up on that roof at Stewartsville more than once. The finance people who are trying to be fiscally conservative and careful with line item by line item looked at for the finances. And then even the people who were teachers who came and the administrators who gave us advice on how do we function with this and how would this work, and the administration who's answered a lot of questions. So it has been, I think, a very uniting thing for the whole community, and I'm actually very positive in our future with this. That being said, I have not had any peace about any of the options, and I am going to vote no on all options.
Dr. Hubach?
Yeah, I am not going to be quite so eloquent as Johnny with a written script, but I too have some major concerns about all four of the options. And while they do address some of the issues that are before us in terms of finance and taking care of facilities, I don't think that those trump the overarching goal that we stated at the very beginning, and that is for the safety, well-being, and education of the kids. Stewartsville in particular, and I think this is true of all of the elementary schools, they are the heart and soul of the community. And in Stewartsville in particular, I believe that it's a rallying point for many of those kids. It is their safe haven, and the teachers have become their guardians in reality, and to disrupt that, especially on the heels of COVID and some of the other disruptions, would be tragic. One of the things that has made me the most uncomfortable about any of the options is the haste that seemed to be part of it, and with very little time to implement and strategize all the ripple effects of those transfers. They're huge. It's not too far in the past that when Faxton closed and when Body Camp closed, that even with more time to calculate those moves and everything, there was a lot of fallout from that. There were mobile classrooms that had to be implemented, and classrooms that were happening in rooms that they were not designed for in the school system, and there was a lot of upheaval with that. And certainly think that there needs to be the detailed analysis and planning for any kind of a move. So I think in summary, I am against all four of the options as well, and agree that we need to look at some other ways of making the repairs for Stewartsville. There have been some things even put on our desk today that are feasible options for replacing the HVAC system at 20% of what was projected. That may not be an absolute real number either, but I think that it reassures us that the work that needs to be done can be done locally and well and at a responsible savings. So, thank you.
I mean, I don't know what I could say that already hasn't really been said, but I started out by saying, like, at these town halls, I think they were really great, and I think we definitely need to do more of them. And some folks came out, and at first they were pretty hot, and then we sat down and talked to them, and as we have a good back and forth conversation, which is what we need to have, more information is always going to be better. The folks that I got to talk to really understood where we were kind of coming from and what we're up against. Didn't agree with the decisions or the options that we had. And, I think that these town halls are a great way to build trust. And to then go ahead and even though this has been on some people's minds for a while, several years and things like that, it was very fresh. And it's really hard to digest really quickly. A lot of the things that we're up against, did not happen within the last 2 or 5 years. It's been 20 or 25 years. And in an effort to turn that around, it takes a lot of effort to turn a cruise ship around. You can't just turn on the dime. So I think it's important that we are not, and I've said this before, ready, fire, aim. We're ready, aim, fire. So I think what we need to do is we need to, again, which sounds like we pretty much have consensus, we need to table these options. We need to continue to talk about any and all options, things that we will do, things that we won't do. But we need to continue to invite the community to see what the right solution is. Because at the end of the day, we can have as many policies and as many meetings as we want, but we need to make sure we get it right. I'm a big believer we have to evaluate everything from our facilities to our staff to figure out what are we doing. Are we investing our money in our kids, or are we investing it in buildings? Sometimes you need to do both. But I think that decision, even though we're the elected officials that are here to make it, it's up to us to not just hear what the community's saying, but to listen to what the community's saying. And only then, when we have back and forth conversation and we're each listening to each other, are we going to hopefully be able to move together in the right direction that can, again, make sure that we are maintaining Bedford County Public Schools and we are protecting the long-term viability and success of our county. So with that, I'm in agreement with the rest of the board that we need to table this discussion until we have more facts, data, and analysis, and we get ultimately buy-in on whatever decision we ever try to make with the community. So that's it.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the executive staff. You did exactly what the financial committee asked you to do in a short period of time. You gave us options. Those options, I thought, were solid options. They were options. They started a lot of conversation. They allowed us to get in front of the community. But you did exactly what we, the financial committee, asked you to do in a very short period of time based on the conversations of budget. But it was to discuss budget, it was discuss capacity while maintaining academic success. And again, I wanted to say thank you to the executive team for doing exactly what we asked you to do. The town halls, I mentioned it in my opening statements. We will definitely be doing more of those. That turned out to be successful in all 3 zones. I want to make sure that we bring back the idea of what we have to consider. We've talked about the reversion, 7.7 million at the end. We're about $300K short of having that plan for 28-29. That money returns back to operations. We reviewed all of the pending CIP projects that are currently unfunded, 118 million in CIP. The good news is between now and 28-29, we do have some funds for maintenance and to spend on dollars. This discussion does not go away. It doesn't go away. So while we're all in agreement that the options that were presented does not fit our need, we have more discussion to do, because at the end of the day, we don't have the funds to maintain our facilities. We don't have the funds to add additional programs. We don't have it. And so I want to make sure we understand this doesn't just go away. You know, I like to use the term kick the can down the road. And so I want to make sure I'm saying that I reserve the right to come back quickly should we need to do that once we have final numbers of revenue from the state. But again, once we get a new superintendent in place, I think this discussion needs to be at the forefront of what are we doing. We've got to have not just a one-year plan, you know, to benefit those who will be in our seats in 10 years. We owe it to them and to our community to be prepared of what's next. Those options were not just about Stewartsville, and I want to make sure the community understands that we heard you on the other topics as well. So there was a huge concern about moving 5th graders to middle school and 8th graders to high school. That discussion still exists. I appreciate those that brought data and studies that showed one way or the other, that supports it, that did not support it. That information is important. But again, the capacity issues do not go away. So again, it's going to have to be a discussion that we continue. Academic success, that doesn't change. We continue to talk about that. And academic success takes money. And we need to look at where we're putting our dollars. I know Mr. Daniels and I are on that financial committee. We're committed to going line item by line item. But I also recommend that for any other committee. Where are we spending dollars at your set committee? If it's facilities, if it's curriculum, no matter what it is, we need to be looking and understanding what our dollars are going to so we can make adjustments for the concerns that have been brought forward. My vote is along with the board, to keep the budget whole as presented by Mr. Hagler and not choose any options at this time. However, we owe it to our community, we owe it to our students. As soon as we have the information back from the state, we have to come back together and determine what we're doing to move forward. So with all comments, it sounds like we have a consensus, Mr. Hagler, for you to create a budget as presented with the understanding that we're going to get an average of the three budgets that you discussed, the House and then the governor. I think you said around 3.5, and so you think we could keep our current budget as presented as whole. If that changes, please notify me immediately so we can call a special called meeting to come back and start having further discussions. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'll just add to that. Once you approve a preliminary, it will be transmitted to the Board of Supervisors. After that, if the numbers change from the state, if it changes by $10, I think we're done. Any significant change from the state, we'll have to come back to a work session, work with the Finance Committee, come back into the full board to vote a different budget in, a revised budget, before we start the next year.
But you'll present that on Monday. We'll be presenting that on Monday night and taking a vote, correct?
Yes, I'll present two summary documents, one on the expenditure and revenue side that you can see the overall numbers, and then I will build the detailed budget and get all that posted online for anybody to look at with all the supporting documents and for the board to look at. I'll have that done probably by tomorrow evening and posted.
Okay. Any other discussion regarding budget? Okay. Do I have a motion to go into closed session?
Mr. Chair, pursuant to Code of Virginia 2.2-3711A29, for the discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or offerers, and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body.
Motion by Mr. Daniels. Mr. Nelms, any discussion? All those in favor to go into closed session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in closed session. All right, do I have a motion to come out of closed?
So moved.
All right, I have a motion by Mr. Daniels. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Nelms. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor to come out of closed session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Johnson?
Whereas the Bedford County School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Bedford County School Board hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which the certification applies, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you. All right, before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I have some information that I want to share with the board for your review, and these are the survey results, which closed on the 11:59 p.m. on the 19th. Ms. Johnson pulled them yesterday. Also in the folder is a sample of a posting for possible superintendent. And so we need to be prepared on Thursday night to discuss the leadership profiles that we want to set for the potential profile for the superintendent. So there are survey questions in here. I would ask by your district, so like for District 1, if you will take the first 3 pages, District 2 take the next 3, and so forth. Review those feedback, or if you want to read all 700 survey comments, totally up to you. But I want to make sure we're all reviewing, and at the end of the night, we know what the feedback is so we can bring a general consensus for next Monday night. Any comments or questions on what my request is regarding the survey? All right, with that being said, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Nelms. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Purvis. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.